Hi, hello. How are you this evening? I hope your day was good. I hope you had a great day. I want to welcome you into this live stream so that we discuss, we continue discussing topics that are related in history of architecture. Today is our fifth live stream, and I want to invite you so that we move together, so that we continue in this live stream. Today we'll be discussing neo-Renaissance architecture and again also look at Islamic architecture. This is our fifth live stream, just as I've said earlier. I want to invite you to check our earlier live streams that we've done under history of architecture. They are available on our channel under the live stream section. Therefore, I want to welcome you so that we discuss and we continue discussing the things that are related to history of architecture under the neo-Renaissance and Islamic architecture, that is. Therefore, welcome. I will continue and share my screen with you so that we move on together. You are able to see whatever I'm presenting, whatever I'm discussing. And for the sake of, in case you have a question, in case you have a comment, kindly post it on my comment section so that in case of anything, I'll be able to respond in case of a question or a comment. Therefore, I'll continue and share my screen so that we move together. So there we are. I've shared my screen with you. So I want to now project whatever we'll be discussing this evening so that we move together. And just as I had said earlier, we'll be looking at neo-Renaissance, and that is what we'll discuss. That is our topic of today. Therefore, I want to welcome you and let us see the concepts that were being addressed in neo-Renaissance. So then, when we talk of neo-Renaissance, we are basically talking of what is basically known as Renaissance revival, and this is an all-encompassing designation that covers many 19th century architecture, or what we call the revival styles. Yesterday we did look at Renaissance architecture, and actually what we are seeing today is now like a regeneration of a number of architectural languages that were there within, especially the 15th to 17th century, as we will see as we go on. So we are also saying that neo-Renaissance, it was neither Grecian, that is Greek revival, nor Gothic revival, but which instead drew inspiration from a wide range of classicism Italian model. So the language that we are discussing today, that is neo-Renaissance, is a language that encompassed or that took inspiration from a number of different models or classicism models, because we are saying it took even, it borrowed even from Greek revival, Gothic revival, Baroque, all those civilizations that were within that period. So we are also saying that under the broad designation, 19th century architects and critics went beyond the architectural style, which began in Florence and central Italy in the early 15th century. And this could be the precursor for various characteristics of neo-Renaissance, because we are saying that the architects of this particular time went beyond the architectural styles that were there in the early 15th century. They also included styles we would identify as Marianist or Baroque. We did look at Baroque and the various features and characteristics of Baroque, but we are saying they went beyond by ensuring that Neo-Renaissance actually took major characteristics from various architectural languages, and that's how Neo-Renaissance was conceived. We're also saying that Neo-Renaissance might be applied by contemporaries to structures that others called Italianate, or when many French Baroque features are present. So we'll see that especially the styles that did well in Italy and French Baroque, we find that Neo-Renaissance borrowed heavily from those civilizations. We're also saying that Neo-Renaissance frequently borrowed architectural elements from a succeeding Marianist period, and as a consequence, a self-consciously Neo-Renaissance manner first began to appear in 1840, and again by 1890, this movement was already in the decline. So just as we saw with the other civilizations, is that they would span for a specific period of time and then they will decline, and then another civilization would come out again, span for a different number of years, depending on the protagonist of that style of architecture. And that's how we ended up having so many ancient languages within the architectural field. Then we're also saying that the Hague Peace Paris, completed in 1913 in heavy French Neo-Renaissance manner, was one of the last notable buildings in this style. Of course, we are saying that the system started declining from 1890, but again by 1913 it was still in place, and we see a model house which we are calling the Hague Peace Paris, which completed in 1913 as a good example of neo-Renaissance, or the features that would define neo-Renaissance in a perfect way. We are also saying that Charles Barry introduced the neo-Renaissance to England with his design of the Traveller's Club, that is Pall Mall, 1829 to 1832. So that's another building that again defines features and characteristics of neo-Renaissance. Again, we're also saying that other early but typical domestic examples of neo-Renaissance include Montenero Tower and the Chateau de Ferraris, both designed in 1850 by Joseph Paxton for members of the Rothschild banking family. So these are just examples of the various buildings that were done and would define neo-Renaissance. Again, we are also noting that by 1851, neo-Renaissance had become the obligatory style for university and public buildings, for banks and financial institutions, and for urban villas in Germany. And maybe this actually might look like a departure from what we saw even with the Renaissance, which really dwelt much on the sacred architecture or the church architecture, and many buildings that were conceived at that time were from the church architecture. But with neo-Renaissance, we are seeing it giving a lot of emphasis on secular building or the public buildings, because we are talking of the banks, financial institutions, public universities, and the rest. Again, we're also saying that French Renaissance architecture was a combination of the earlier Gothic style coupled with a strong Italian influence represented by arches, arcades, balustrading, and in general a more flowing line of design than had been apparent in the earlier Gothic. So these are some of the features that were employed in Neo-Renaissance and that would typify Neo-Renaissance. Again, by 1875, Neo-Renaissance had become accepted style in Europe for all public and bureaucratic building. And actually, this is one of the buildings that we are done under Neo-Renaissance, and you can see some of the features that we've talked about: the arches, the pillars, the windows, and this is how some of the buildings under Neo-Renaissance were conceived. Actually, sometimes you may not also see a lot of differences from the past civilization because the styles actually borrowed heavily from the previous architectural languages. So again, we can look at various notable features for Neo-Renaissance, and one of them that was very evident and that demonstrates Neo-Renaissance is what we call the staircase. And you are saying that this is one of the most widely copied features of Renaissance architecture. We're talking of the staircase, and we are saying that this was especially from the chartex of Boris and Chambord. These are the people who are quite, or the protagonists of Neo-Renaissance. We are also saying that Blois had the favorite residence of French kings and throughout the Renaissance. So most of the residents of the French kings were done in Blois, and then we are saying that the Chartex de Blois triumphal staircase was imitated almost from the moment of its completion, and was certainly the precursor of the double staircase. It became a common feature for the staircase to be not just a feature for the internal architecture, but also the external. So we are saying that staircase is one of the characteristics or notable features for Neo-Renaissance, and we are also noting that it became a common feature not only for the interior architecture but also for the exterior architecture. And we have some of the illustration to show the way staircase was employed in Neo-Renaissance. This is an interior way that the staircase was utilized in Neo-Renaissance. So we also have other interior and exterior expressions to show us how the staircase was utilized, or the staircase was employed within Neo-Renaissance. Then the other common feature is grass, and we are saying that in the 19th century, new and innovative use of grass was able to give protection from the weather, giving the staircase the appearance of being in the true Renaissance open style when it was a truly internal feature. So we are just noting how grass was used to bring out the appearance of the staircase. And you're also saying that further and more adventure use of grass also enabled the open and arcaded Renaissance courtyard to be reproduced as lofty halls with glazed roofs. So that's how grass was used within Neo-Renaissance. We are saying that it enabled the open and arcaded Renaissance courtyard to be reproduced as lofty halls with glazed roofs. And I think we've seen that with this design, because you can see this is actually an exterior bit, a courtyard within a design in neo-Renaissance. But this grass, the way grass has employed to cover the loft and to cover the courtyard, is one of the way that grass was employed in neo-Renaissance, which is a feature that maybe we didn't see it quite heavily, uh, in the previous civilizations that we've discussed. And that will bring us to the end of neo-Renaissance. It's a short one. Uh, Before we get into the Islamic architecture, that's about neo-Renaissance. We've seen that in summary is a civilization that has borrowed much from the previous civilizations, from Greek all the way to to Renaissance itself, and now this one is an amalgamation of the various uh, style of architectures that has been done before. Then, having looked at neo-Renaissance, we will move on. We'll move on and look at Islamic architecture and see how buildings were conceived in ceramic and how Islamic architecture would be defined. Of course, this is a little bit a departure from what we've been discussing, the classical architecture, because Islamic architecture in its own way, being a different, being an architecture that is done under different religious outfit, then it brings totally different feel from whatever we've been discussing. Because most of the architecture that we've looked at has been cutting across the church architecture. So therefore, in Islamic, we look at a number of concepts, just as introductory concepts. We are saying that through the pattern displayed by this architecture is diverse. Though the pattern displayed by this architecture is diverse from region to region, some coherency is achieved since it all springs from similar behaviors established around common fundamental philosophy. So we'll see as we go through that with Islamic architecture there is a lot of repetition in how elements are used from one uh, building to another, from one composition to another, and we'll see the reason as to why uh, we had so many similar repetition of the components that were used in within this type of architecture, or within this architectural language that is the Islamic architecture. And we are saying that though the patterns displayed by this architecture is diverse from region to region, it also exhibits some coherency, which springs from similar behaviors established around common fundamental philosophies, e.g., same fasting period, daily prayer routine, similar legislative structure, schooling, readership, and annual interactions during pilgrimage in the holy city. So these are some of the philosophies that are established or that are followed within the Islamic religion, and they have impacted greatly on how they conceive the architecture. Because you are saying that due to uh, different regions observing fasting period at the same time, daily prayer at the same time, similar legislative structure, schooling, which is the same model, then you find it impacts the architecture by conceiving buildings that are almost similar. We are also saying that due to the above, we see in the Islamic world common fashion characteristics and inspirations, disciplined routine of religion, and established traditions led to similar towns. So I think that is a fact that I've alluded quite well because those disciplined routines, regular uh, activities, regular same fasting period, building their religion, routines for their religion, uh, impacted on their architecture, and they were able to produce almost buildings that were similar in different towns. Again, we are saying idealization of garden led to creation of water-centered geometrically patterned paradises containing walled compounds. Then thoughts, discipline, and repetitive running of Quran and other aspects of running without questions led to a repetitive and slow evolving architecture with repeated geometric patterns more concerned with conformity than originality. So basically what you are saying and what you'll see with the Islamic architecture is basically that the way their thinking was modeled, how their discipline with regard to various aspects, even the way they interact socially, and repetitive running of Quran and other aspects within the uh, the culture, actually without a lot of questioning, that led to repetitive and slow evolving architecture because you find that people will not even also question a lot on why some elements have to be repeated throughout. And we are saying that that led to a very slow evolving architecture. Actually, we are also noting that the use of those repeated geometric patterns was more concerned with conforming to what has been happening, but not rather the originality of the ideas, originality of the designs that were being conceived at that time. And due to this fact, most of the Islamic architecture at that particular time lacked human representation because you would not you would find like all the buildings are conceived from one designer, whereas they were designed by different architects. We are also noting that there emerged a group of Arab tribesmen who organized themselves into Muslim armies in the southern desert and spread the message of Islam along the northern shore of Africa, westward to the Atlantic and eastward into Central Asia. That is just a demonstration of how the Arabs and who are Muslims moved out even to reach to Africa, and how the Islamic architecture got to this period, this areas. We are also saying that leadership of the Muslim community around 661 AD moved to Greater Syria, Damascus, Jerusalem, where it built its power using commercial wealth of the region and free from the political influence of Mecca and Medina, the cradle of the religion. So it's at this point that the distinctive Islamic architecture began to evolve. So we'll see even from one of my presentation, one of the illustrations I have is the most the mosque at Damascus, and we'll see how mighty their power was in terms of wealth, and they were able to conceive very great mosques that were quite monumental. Then we also look at building types and patterns. We are saying that the streets of the city focused upon the mosque and the rulers' palace, which were closely related. The streets of the city focused upon the mosque and the rulers' palace, which were closely related. So the way they organized their buildings in towns. Uh, they focused their streets towards the rural Paris, and that was like the focal point of a particular town. The form of the mosque was already established on the example of the courtyard of Muhammad House and of Medina. We are also noting that a strong axial emphasis derived from the requirement to focus prayer upon a specific place, initially Jerusalem and after at Mecca. So this is again we are seeing the characteristic of axial or an axis being also repeated with the Islamic architecture. And you are saying that a strong axial emphasis derived from the requirement to focus prayer upon a specific place. So that axis would be defined by or would be influenced by a specific place where people would face when they are offering their prayers. But we are saying that initially it was Jerusalem, but as time went by, uh, the center changed to Mecca. Again, we are saying that to establish this direction, initially a post struck on the ground proclaimed the Qibla or the direction of prayer, but was later superseded by a semicircular niche, what we are calling the mihrab. Minrab. So Kibra would proclaim the direction of prayer, but initially we are saying it was done by a post struck on the ground, but later on it was replaced by a semicircular niche, the Minrab, that would actually define the direction of prayer. Again, we're also noting that to differentiate themselves from the Christians, Muslims did not make use of bells to call people for prayer, but rather chose to respond to the call of the muezzin, initially given from the walls of the prophet house. Remember, we talked of aligning the cities, aligning the mosques with the prophet's house, and therefore that's why the muezzin call was being uh, done from the prophet's house. Again, we've also noted the difference between the Muslim and Christian. They didn't want to look like they're adopting whatever the Christians were doing, and that's why they adopted the muezzin to be able to notify people that prayers are about to start. Then again, we also saying that in the building of the Great Mosque of Damascus, early in the 8th century, they adopted square watchtowers, which suited the purpose and so became a prototype minaret. So we'll see the mosque at Damascus, and you'll see the square watchtowers. We'll be able to identify that. So we are also noting that Islamic religion emphasized cleanliness among its members, and therefore sanitary and washing facilities were provided in the mosque. And you'll also see this quite clearly when we'll be looking at the various characteristics of Islamic architecture. We are also noting that mosque had also quite a number of functions, one of them being a place of prayer. It was also a place for meditation. People would also use mosque to take refuge and even sleep on occasions, socializing as a safe storage for valuables, and there were spaces that were dedicated for those purposes. And again, it was also used as an administration place for community funds and other activities. Then we're also saying that the city Great Mosque was directly connected with the ruler's resident. I think I had alluded to that fact before. Again, community law was community law, Muslim law, and theological guidance was often sought from the ruler's residence. Then we are also noting that the mosque therefore also became a place for administration of justice and other public pronouncements. So these are just functions that were a mosque would be expected to conduct. Maybe sometime to the date, things have evolved, things have changed. Some of these functions are no longer taking place in the mosque, but at that ancient time, these are some of the functions that mosque would carry. We're also noting that due to this multiplicity of functions, specialized building sections were inevitable, e.g. theological training section, that is the madrasa, living cells, discussion areas, etc. And that's how those functions also informed the spatial relationship uh, within the mosque. Again, we are noting that Islamic community also created public buildings and engineering works, e.g. canals, bridges, dams, aqueducts, fountain, reservoirs, and fortification. Remember, again, we also saw quite a lot of advancement of these civil works from the Roman civilization. And then we can see this is continuing even within the Islamic architecture. An example of fortification is the rabat, a building type enclosing a religious community poised as a frontier and an outpost of faith. Again, we are also noting that Islam had specific requirements for travel and a tradition of trade and communication across the empires. Buildings therefore developed to service this function in the form of protected stopping places to shelter travelers and caravanseros and hands in the cities of similar functions. I think this is a factor that has been we alluded to it before when we talked of how the Islamic architecture developed in Damascus and how it brought about the construction of the mosque at Damascus due to the aspect of trade and the fact that they had economic power and they were able to conceive that mosque. Then again, we can deliberate a little bit and see how the Western Islamic style developed. And we are saying that this development developed in Muslim northwest coast of Africa and Spain. That is, we are talking of areas like regions like Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and southern Spain. And these are countries that has quite a large following of the Muslim community. And you can see actually the reason behind it because Islam is the religion that maybe was quite well articulated to these regions at that particular ancient time. It was initiated by the Umayyad after they were driven out from the east by a military ruler of the House of Abbas in the year 750 AD, and that's how they moved out and established their bases in west coast of Africa and some parts of Spain. Then we are also saying that the Caliphate was now based at Cordoba in Spain, and here they built the Great Mosque of Cordoba in 1784. And when you talk of Caliphate, we are basically talking of office of the political leader of the Muslim community, Ummah, or state, particularly during the period of 1632 to 1258. And it's at this time at Cordoba in Spain, they were able to build the mosque of Cordoba. I think we'll also see the same an illustration of the same mosque. Then again, we are saying that the design of this mosque was similar to the Great Mosque of Damascus. It had great arcade on the prayer hall, lifted through the story of columns. And I think this again is also seen, despite the fact that they've moved from the east, they are still maintaining the same features as of those features that we are from Damascus, simply because they are under the same Islamic religion and they are observing uh, the same precepts at the same time, similar prayer time, fasting period, and again we are seeing it impacting them as much as they've moved from the east. We are also noting that the mosque had a southern orientation, which was incorrect in Spain, though it would have been correct in Damascus. So again, we are seeing, though in Spain the way the mosque was oriented was wrong, it would be correct in Damascus, and you can see how rigid the architecture was at that particular time. We are also noting that in North Africa, there is a series of rabbats at Bizerta, Tripoli, and Susa between the 9th and the 10th century, and they were typically two-story structures containing a central court with outer walls buttressed with half-round towers. We are also noting that the Great Mosque of North Africa were influenced by the Cordoba Mosque and Damascus one, though they had a distinctive plan where the prayer hall had aisles running parallel with the Qibla axis, the central aisles being heightened or emphasized. So I think the main point here we need to know is how the mosques at Cordoba, the mosque at Damascus, though now they are building other mosques in North Africa, we can see the influence of those mosques that were done at that particular time. Then we're also noting that against the Qibla was wall were unequally emphasized aisles running traversely, and at the crossing before the minaret was placed a dome. So again, we'll see a dome as an example, an example, or actually as a characteristic of the Islamic architecture. So again, we are noting that Paris architecture also developed, and in Granada, for instance, in the 14th century, the Nasrid dynasty built a royal citadel, which was fortified and extended in a series of palatial courtyards to become the Paris of Alhambra. And again, courtyard is also another key feature in most Islamic architecture, and we are seeing it being employed here, where the Nasrid dynasty was built the royal citadels. Again, we are saying that the Paris contained all the elements of display, luxury, and function that typify the fortress of Islamic ruler. In this one, stucco decorations are used together with tiles, carved marbles, plaster, paint, in great artistry. So these also are other features that are evident within the Islamic architecture. Again, we are also noting that the Paris elements are linked by two formal courtyards, and the important reception rooms are pavilions supported by ancillary rooms. So this is just a description of how the royal citadels were done. We are done at that particular time by the Nasrid dynasty. Then we look at a number of Islamic characteristics, Islamic architecture characteristics, and one of them is what we are calling the similar architectural aspects. Most of these characteristics I've alluded to them within the discussions. So we'll just look at them briefly. Because we are saying, like in similar architectural aspect, we are saying that the Islamic architecture is based on similar behavioral patterns established from common philosophies in their religion. We talked of their prayer routine, their legislative structure, similar legislative structure, their schooling, their leadership, the interaction during pilgrimage. These are some of the things we are talking about and saying they are similar from region to region, and that impacted on how they conceive their architecture. And you're saying due to these common fashion characteristics and inspirations in their routine and established traditions, it led to similar architectural adoption of similar architectural aspects or elements within their town architecture. Another characteristics is an evolving architecture, and we are saying that through discipline and repetitive learning of Quran, other aspects of religion without questioning led to an evolving architecture, and actually resorted to repeated geometric patterns, which we are more concerned of originality. And this is I had alluded to this factor before, but this impacted the architecture such that it lacked human representation, or you will not attach different human representation with different typologies of their buildings that they had done at that particular time. Though buildings themselves were done by different architects, but due to the repetition of geometric patterns, their elements then it deprived the architecture of human representation. But you are saying this has evolved with time and it has changed. Another characteristic is focus, or what you are calling orientation. This is evident in the town streets, which always had focus upon the mosque and the ruler's palace, which were closely related. They also had a strong emphasis on the orientation of the mosque, which was derived from the requirement of focused prayer upon a specific palace, a specific place. And we said initially it was Jerusalem, but of course today now it's in Mecca. Then we have cleanliness as another characteristic of Islamic architecture, and we are saying that the Islamic culture emphasizes on cleanliness amongst its members, and this influences the architecture, where they provide strategically placed sanitary and washing facilities in the mosque. So this is another characteristic in the Islamic architecture, cleanliness, and they have to provide those sanitary and washing facilities strategically within the compositions. Another characteristic is jurisdiction, and we are saying that the city's great mosque were directly connected to the ruler's residence, just as I had alluded earlier. And this is where community law, Muslim law, and theological guidance was often acquired, and this made the mosques to become places for administration and of justice and other public activities. And again, due to this multiplicity of functions, specialized buildings and sections were also included. We talked of the madrasas, discussion areas, and living cells, and that's how jurisdiction actually impacted on the architecture, because they had to provide space for all these functions. So another characteristic is the dome, and you are seeing that Muslim royalty built pressure domes in continuation of the Roman and Persian imperial models. In the early centuries of Islam, domes were closely associated with the royalty. A dome built in front of the mihrab of the mosque, for example, was at least initially meant to emphasize the praise of a prince during royal ceremony. So we are seeing how dome was used to communicate to them and how it influenced the architecture, because where it was done, it was supposed to, or it was associated with royalty, and that's where the prince would have his seating within that composition. Then we are saying that with time and as time went by and with involvement of the architecture, the domes became primarily focal points for decoration or for direction of prayer. The use of domes in mausoleum can likewise reflect royal patronage or be seen as representing the honor and prestige which domes symbolized, rather than giving any specific meaning. So we are saying in mausoleum they were just uh, domes were done just to reflect the royal patronage or representing honor and prestige, but they had no funerary symbolism within the mausoleum. Then we also have calligraphy. Calligraphy, we are talking of writings that took place on the walls instead of other in other formats. And we are saying that the writings on the walls were usually verses from the Quran, and this was done by use of beautiful handwriting, which became quite important, and again was also employed with the coins that they were using in the civilization. Again, we are also noting that calligraphy is used to ornament buildings such as mosques, madrasas, mausoleums, wooden objects such as baskets, ceramics, and therefore calligraphy became quite central with the Islamics, even in different concepts, not only in the architecture but also in the utility programs products. And that will bring us to the last but not the least of the Islamic architecture. I mentioned about courtyard is another great characteristic within the Islamic architecture. But for now, we will basically look at those 7 characteristics, and maybe now we can look at a number of features within the Islamic architecture, and one of them is the dome. One of them is the dome, and we can see how the dome was conceived. And we've already talked and seen how dome was utilized within the Islamic architecture, and actually even the parts for the dome, because we are talking of the finale, we are talking of the inverted rotors, the dome itself, and the drum. You can see the same being conceptualized within this existing building. Then we also talked of the mosque at Damascus, the huge mosque, which we are talking of was done at the height of their wealth. And we can see how they conceived the mosque, the way we talked of the square minaret, and that's how the mosque at Damascus looks like. And we are saying that this mosque also influenced their works in Africa, especially when they were shifting to the northern Africa. It influenced a lot of works that were done within those regions. We also talked of the mosque at Cordoba, again another great mosque that was done at that particular time, and also influenced a lot of Islamic architecture that was done at that particular time. So we also have noted about the calligraphy and how it was used to decorate the interiors of the mosques. And that will bring us to the end of Islamic architecture. So again, I wish to let you know that we've been doing episodes on the history of architecture. This is our fifth episode. Therefore, I will invite you to go through it again in your free time. And it's available under the live section. So kindly go through it again. In case of any comment, you can still comment under the same tutorial so that we will be able to also respond in case there are any questions. And therefore, I want to thank you for being with me in this live stream. Thank you and God bless you. If you are not one of my subscribers, kindly do that. I will be really glad if you do that. Thank you and God bless you.